The memory is a specific weight against my shoulder, her breath tracing the shell of my ear. Outside, the storm hammered the cabin roof, drowning the world. But inside, the silence was absolute. The fire had died to embers. We stood in the dark, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. Then came the whisper, low and rough. I know you want me, but you can't have me. It wasn't a rejection. It was a confession, wrapped in a warning. To understand why that silence felt so loud, you have to understand the noise we came from. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that seemed determined to ruin the suspension of Murphy's car. It was a structure of timber and glass, isolated in a way that felt deliberate, smelling of pine needles and old, settled dust. We arrived with the late afternoon sun cutting through the trees, casting long, fractured shadows across the porch. Murphy was immediately in motion, the older sister mode engaging like a reflex. She was directing traffic, pointing at bags, talking about dinner schedules. I was 24, but to Murphy, I was still 12 and prone to wandering off. Then there was Luna. She stepped out of the passenger seat slowly, unfolding herself from the car with a kind of deliberate grace that made the rustic setting look almost ridiculous. She wore city clothes, tailored linen, a watch that cost more than my car, and she carried an air of sophisticated fatigue. She didn't look at the cabin. She looked at me. It was a brief, assessing glance, but it held a precision that Murphy's chaotic affection always missed. We started the architecture of unpacking. The cabin wasn't designed for 3 adults navigating personal space. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was narrow, a bottleneck of luggage and bodies. Murphy was shouting something from the kitchen about the fridge temperature. I was trying to maneuver a suitcase into the back room when Luna appeared in the doorway. There wasn't enough space for us to pass without contact. In a normal world, one of us would have retreated. We didn't. She pressed herself against the doorframe, but the space was still impossibly tight. I had to slide past her. The proximity turned a simple logistical problem into something charged. My arm brushed against hers. It wasn't a spark, it was a recognition. The fabric of her shirt was cool, but the skin beneath it radiated a steady warmth. I smelled her perfume then. Something complex, like wood smoke and expensive whiskey. It was a scent that didn't belong here, among the damp wool and cedar. Tight squeeze, she murmured. Her voice was low, pitched for a room much smaller than the one we were in. She didn't move away when I passed. She stayed there, in the threshold, watching me wrestle the bed. That was the first crack in the dynamic. Murphy was in the other room, making noise, filling the space with safe, familiar sibling energy. But here, in the narrow hallway, the air had thickened. Luna wasn't treating me like Murphy's little sister. She was treating me like an equal player in a game I hadn't realized we were playing. I unpacked slowly, conscious of the open door behind me. I could hear them talking in the main room. Murphy's laugh was loud, easy. Luna's response was quieter, a lower register that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. I changed my shirt, my back to the door, and felt a sudden, irrational spike of adrenaline. It was the feeling of being observed, even if the hallway was empty. When I walked back out to the main room, Luna was standing by the fireplace, a glass of wine already in her hand. She turned as I entered. Her gaze held mine, unflinching, over the rim of the glass. Dinner that night was a blur of logistics, but the atmosphere had shifted. Luna's presence acted as a gravity well, bending the room's energy toward her. I sat across from her, watching her hands as she ate. They were capable hands, unadorned except for a single silver ring. Every movement she made was efficient, almost hypnotic. Murphy told stories about work, about our parents, filling the silence that Luna seemed comfortable letting stretch. Every time I laughed at Murphy's jokes, I found Luna watching my mouth. It wasn't predatory. It was curious. Like she was trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't expected to find interesting. By the time the fire died down that first night, the boundaries were already blurring. The distinct scent of her perfume lingered in the shared spaces, a ghost of her presence even after she'd gone to her room. I lay in bed, listening to the wind in the pines, and realized the weekend wasn't going to be about relaxation. It was going to be about survival. I woke before the sun. The cabin held a stillness that felt heavy, like a held breath waiting to be released. Murphy was dead to the world in the back room. She slept like she lived, loudly and without reservation, sprawled across the mattress in a tangle of blankets. I slid out of bed, my bare feet hitting the wide plank floorboards. The wood was ice cold, a shock that traveled up my shins and settled deep in my chest. I pulled on a thick wool cardigan, wrapping it tight against the morning chill, and padded silently into the main room. The kitchen was a small corner of the open layout, shadowed and smelling faintly of last night's wood smoke and the damp earth from beneath the foundation. I started the espresso machine. The hiss of steam sounded violent in the absolute quiet, a mechanical intrusion into the peace. I was focused on the grind, the tamp, the mechanical comfort of the ritual, trying to ground myself in the simple physics of making coffee, when the air shifted behind me. I didn't hear footsteps. I just felt the sudden, heavy pressure of someone else in the room. "Coffee," a voice said, low and rough with sleep. I turned, my hand still resting on the chrome lever of the machine. Luna was leaning against the doorframe. She wasn't wearing the tailored linen from yesterday. She was wrapped in a robe of dark, heavy silk that looked like spilled ink against the rough-hewn timber walls. Her hair was loose, falling in a chaotic dark wave over one shoulder. It was a jarring contrast, the rustic, dusty cabin, and this woman who looked like she'd just stepped out of a high-stakes negotiation in a city that never slept. She looked tired, but her eyes were alert, tracking my movements with that same unsettling precision I'd felt yesterday. "I'm making some," I said, my voice sounding too loud, too thin in the morning quiet. "Do you want a cup?" Desperately. She moved into the kitchen space. It was too small for two people who weren't comfortable with each other, but Luna didn't seem to mind the lack of clearance. She leaned her hip against the counter, inches from where I stood waiting for the machine to finish its cycle. The proximity was a physical weight. I could smell the sleep on her, warm and human, mixed with the faint, lingering trace of her signature scent. It was intoxicating, a sensory overload that made the simple act of breathing feel complicated. I focused on the machine, watching the dark liquid drip into the cup, counting the seconds to keep my heart rate steady. "Murphy is still out cold? Your sister could sleep through an earthquake," Luna murmured, her voice vibrating in the small space between us. She reached past me for a mug from the drying rack. Her arm brushed my shoulder, a light, incidental contact that sent a jolt of static through my nervous system. She didn't pull back. She let the contact linger for a second longer than necessary before grabbing the ceramic. It's one of her few enviable qualities. I poured the shot into her mug, handing it to her. Our fingers brushed against the warm ceramic. Again, that hesitation. A microsecond where neither of us let go of the cup, a shared anchor in the space between us. I looked up, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, but the pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. "Sugar?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I reached for the ceramic jar on the counter, a reflex. I didn't even take sugar, just as she reached for a spoon. Our hands collided. It wasn't a violent impact, just a tangle of fingers over the lid. The jar was cold, her skin was warm. For a heartbeat, we were frozen there, a knot of hands and intent. I felt the ridge of her knuckles, the soft skin of her wrist. In a normal kitchen, with normal people, you pull away. You apologize. You laugh it off. We didn't. We just watched each other, acknowledging the accident as something else entirely. "Black," she said finally, her voice dropping an octave. She slowly withdrew her hand, picking up her mug instead. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving my face. "You have a very specific way of doing things." I paused, my own mug halfway to my mouth, feeling exposed. "What do you mean?" "The way you leveled the coffee grounds," she said softly. "The way you hold the cup. Even the way you walked across the room to avoid the squeaky floorboard. It's deliberate. Careful." She tilted her head, the silk of her robe shifting with the movement, revealing the elegant line of her throat. "Murphy is chaos. She moves like she's constantly colliding with the world. You move like you're trying not to disturb the air." It was a terrifyingly accurate observation from someone I'd technically known for years, but never really known. "I guess I learned to be quiet. Murphy takes up a lot of space." "She does," Luna agreed. She set her mug down on the counter, the sound sharp against the wood. She took a step closer. The space between us evaporated. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a tangible force. But quiet doesn't mean invisible. I see you. The words hung there, heavy and charged. This wasn't the way you talk to your best friend's little sister. This was a recalibration. She was looking at me not as a child to be managed, but as a puzzle to be solved. The air in the kitchen thickened, charged with a tension that felt dangerous and inevitable. I gripped my mug tighter, the heat burning my palms, grounding me. "I'm not invisible," I managed to say. My voice was steady, surprising me. "No," Luna whispered. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment, before her fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. The touch was electric, shocking in its intimacy. Her fingertips grazed my temple, cool against my flushed skin. "You're really not." She dropped her hand, but she didn't step back. We stood there in the cold kitchen, the smell of coffee and potential hanging between us, while the sun finally crested the trees outside, flooding the room with a light that felt too bright, too revealing for the secret we were suddenly sharing. The sound of Murphy stirring in the other room broke the spell, shattering the moment into 1,000 sharp pieces. Luna stepped back, the mask of the friend sliding back into place, but the air around us remained altered, heavy with everything we hadn't said. By noon, the gray promise of the morning had burned off, replaced by a sun that felt determined to expose everything we were trying to keep hidden. The air above the lake was heavy, shimmering with heat, while the water below remained a slab of dark, cold obsidian. We had migrated to the dock, a weathered wooden tongue extending 50 feet into the deep water. It was a setting that demanded exposure. Swimsuits, bare skin, and the kind of lethargy that makes every glance feel deliberate. Murphy was the disruption. She was in the water, shouting about the temperature, breaking the surface with violent, joyous splashes that sent ripples distorting the reflection of the pines. She was pure kinetic energy, a creature of noise and motion. I sat on the edge of the dock, my legs dangling into the cold water, feigning interest in a paperback I hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. Luna lay on a towel behind me. She was stillness personified. She wore a black swimsuit that was architectural in its simplicity, cut high and sharp. Large, dark sunglasses hid her eyes, making her expression impossible to read. She lay on her stomach, propped up on her elbows, reading a magazine with a detachment that felt practiced. I could feel her presence behind me like a source of heat. It was a magnetic pull I couldn't ignore. I found myself listening not to the water lapping against the pilings, but to the rhythm of her breathing, the slight shift of fabric whenever she turned a page. I was watching her. I knew I shouldn't, but the pull was magnetic. I watched the way the sun caught the water droplets on her shoulder, the way her hair dried in chaotic waves against her neck. It was an exercise in torture, analyzing the texture of her skin from 3 feet away, paralyzed by the gap between us. "You're going to burn," she said. Her voice cut through the sound of Murphy's splashing. I turned. Luna hadn't looked up from her magazine, but she held a bottle of sunscreen out in her right hand, dangling it by the cap. "I put some on earlier," I lied. "I wasn't talking about you." She finally looked up, tilting her head slightly. The sunglasses reflected my own silhouette back at me, 2 tiny, distorted versions of myself, sitting frozen on the edge of the dock. "My shoulders, they're burning. Do you mind?" It was a simple request. In any other context, it would have been nothing. But here, with the memory of the kitchen still humming in my veins, it felt like a dare. I took the bottle. It was warm from the sun, slick with condensation. I moved to sit beside her, the wood of the dock burning my shins. "Just the shoulders," she murmured, lowering her head back onto her arms. I poured the lotion into my palm. It was cold, a stark contrast to the heat radiating off her skin. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, a breath held, before I laid my hands on her. The contact was electric. Her skin was incredibly soft, hot to the touch, and the muscles beneath were tight, coiled with hidden tension. I worked the lotion in, my thumbs tracing the line of her shoulder blades. It was an intimacy I hadn't prepared for. The smell of coconut mixed with the unique chemistry that was entirely hers. My hands moved with a precision I didn't know I possessed. I wanted to be clinical, efficient, to get it over with before my hands started shaking. But the texture of the moment was too heavy. I felt the precise weight of her trust, the vulnerability of her exposed back. I let my fingers linger at the base of her neck, sweeping the hair aside. "You have good hands," she said, her voice muffled by her arms. "Steady. Not like your sister." "Murphy would have slapped it on and run back to the water," I said, my voice sounding strained. "Murphy creates waves," Luna agreed. She turned her head then, resting her cheek on her arm so she could look at me. She didn't sit up. She just watched me, her face inches from my hand, which was still resting on her shoulder. "You study the water." I pulled my hand back, wiping the excess lotion on my towel. "I'm just observant." "You are," she said. The teasing tone was gone, replaced by something sharper. She sat up slowly, the movement languid and controlled. She reached up and took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dark, adjusting to the sudden light, and they locked onto mine with an intensity that made the air vanish from my lungs. "You watch everything. You watch the room, you watch your sister, and you watch me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a flush that had nothing to do with the sun. I opened my mouth to deny it, to make a joke, to deflect with the little sister persona that was my safety net. But the look in her eyes stopped me. It was unflinching. She knew. She had felt my attention on her skin all afternoon, and instead of blocking it, she was inviting it. "I can't help it," I whispered, the truth slipping out before I could catch it. "I didn't ask you to stop," she replied. The silence that followed was heavy, charged, stretching tight across the dock until the sound of Murphy climbing the ladder shattered the moment, pulling us back from the edge of something we couldn't uncross. The crisis arrived at 4:15 p.m., heralded by a ringtone that cut through the lazy afternoon heat like a serrated knife. We had migrated back from the dock to the cabin's wraparound porch, drifting in that Sunday's state between napping and waking, when Murphy's phone began its frantic vibration against the wooden table. She answered it with a groan that immediately sharpened into her crisis management voice, a tone I knew intimately, a mix of apology and authority. I watched the transformation happen in real time. The relaxed, vacation mode sister evaporated, replaced by the city lawyer who lived on caffeine and deadlines. She paced the length of the porch, her hand chopping the air as she argued with someone about a filing error that apparently threatened Western civilization. When she finally hung up, the silence that rushed back in felt fragile. "I have to go into town," she announced, already shoving her feet into her boots. "I need a stable Wi-Fi connection and a printer, and I need them 20 minutes ago. The signal out here is garbage." "You're leaving?" I asked, sitting up. The question felt heavy in my mouth. Without her, the silence between Luna and me would lose its only guardrail. "I'll be back for dinner," she promised, grabbing her keys. She looked at Luna, who hadn't moved from her spot on the porch swing. "Don't let the kid burn the place down." It was a throwaway line, a standard big sister jab. But it landed differently today. Luna didn't laugh. She just tilted her glass of wine in a mock salute, her eyes hidden behind those dark sunglasses again. "Go save the world, Murphy. We'll survive." We watched the dust cloud from Murphy's SUV settle long after the engine noise had faded down the dirt road. The departure changed the atmospheric pressure of the cabin instantly. With her gone, the cabin felt suddenly immense and incredibly intimate. The air grew still, charged with a potential that made the hair on my arms stand up. I expected Luna to retreat. That was the polite social contract. When the mutual link vanishes, the remaining parties withdraw to neutral corners until the buffer returns. But Luna didn't move. She stayed on the swing, one leg tucked under her, the silk of her cover-up slipping to reveal the long line of her thigh. She took a slow sip of wine, the ice clinking against the glass, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet. "Finally," she said softly. The word hung there, ambiguous and terrifying. I stood up, needing to burn off the sudden spike of nervous energy coursing through me. "I'm going to chop some wood," I said, the declaration sounding abrupt. "For the fire tonight." "Go ahead," she murmured. The wood pile was at the edge of the clearing, visible from the porch, but far enough away to feel like a separate stage. I grabbed the axe, grateful for the weight of the handle, the rough texture of the wood against my palms. It was a grounding, physical reality in a world that felt increasingly fluid. I set a log on the stump, took a breath, and swung. The blade bit into the wood with a satisfying crack, splitting the pine cleanly. I fell into the rhythm of it. Set, swing, split. The physical exertion was a relief. It gave me somewhere to put the tension that had been coiling in my chest since the kitchen this morning. I stripped off my outer layer, working in my tank top, feeling the cool evening air against my heated skin. I knew she was watching. I didn't need to look at the porch to know she was there. Her attention was a static charge in the air. After 10 minutes, I paused to wipe the sweat from my forehead and glanced up. Luna was standing at the porch railing now, leaning forward, her wine glass forgotten on the table. She had taken off her sunglasses. Her expression wasn't bored or detached. It was focused. "I didn't know you knew how to do that," she called out. Her voice carried easily across the yard. "Murphy hates the cold," I called back, leaning on the axe handle. Someone had to learn how to keep the fire going. "Competence," she said, the word rolling off her tongue like a tasting note. She walked down the steps, crossing the grass toward me. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell the wine on her breath, mixed with the pine scent of the split wood. "It looks good on you." The little sister label lay in the dirt, shattered. You don't look at a child the way she was looking at me. She was looking at my arms, at the sweat on my collarbone, at the axe in my hand. It was an appraisal of capability, an acknowledgement that I was an adult who could handle dangerous things. "I'm not just her shadow," I said quietly, the admission feeling risky. "I never thought you were," Luna replied. The sun had dipped below the tree line, casting the clearing in a bruised, purple twilight. The shadows stretched long and thin between us. "But it's interesting to see you when you're not editing yourself for her benefit." The air between us tightened, the distance closing without either of us moving a muscle. The safety of the trio was gone. It was just us, the coming dark, and the undeniable pull of a gravity I was done fighting. We moved into the kitchen as the twilight turned to true dark, the transition from the cool dusk to the heated interior of the cabin acting like a pressure seal. The room, which had seemed merely small in the morning light, now felt microscopic. It was a space designed for solitary confinement, not for two people circling each other with intent. We decided on pasta. Simple, tactile, requiring constant attention. I was at the cutting board, tasked with the prep work. She was at the stove, managing the sauce. The choreography of cooking became a silent, high-stakes conversation. In a kitchen this size, avoidance is an impossibility. You have to yield space to take space. It became a dance of proximity and retreat. I would step back to reach the salt cellar, and she would slide forward to check the reduction, our bodies passing with mere inches to spare. Every pass was a calculated risk, a brush with the magnetic field that seemed to surround her. I could feel the heat radiating from the stove, the humidity of the boiling water, but it was nothing compared to the heat coming from her. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of garlic, rosemary, and the rich, tannic smell of the Cabernet she had opened and poured with a steady hand. "You're rushing," she said. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching the onions sweat in the pan, swirling the wine in her glass with that hypnotic, rhythmic motion that drew the eye. "I'm hungry," I deflected, the knife rhythm on the board speeding up, the blade hitting the wood with aggressive taps. "Hunger is fine," she murmured, turning to lean against the counter, facing me. "Impatience creates mistakes." She set her glass down. The sound was a sharp punctuation mark in the simmering quiet. She moved behind me. I froze. I didn't stop chopping, but every muscle in my back locked up. I felt her presence envelop me before she even touched me. She reached around, her left hand coming to rest on the counter edge, effectively trapping me, while her right hand covered mine on the knife handle. The contact was a shock to the system, absolute and grounding. Her fingers were cool, her grip firm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she adjusted my grip, her thumb pressing into the soft skin between my thumb and forefinger. "Let the weight of the blade do the work," she whispered. Her breath ghosted against the sensitive skin of my neck, sending a shiver racing down my spine. "Don't force it. Guide it." I couldn't breathe. The world narrowed down to the sensation of her hand over mine, the smell of her perfume mixing with the herbs, the overwhelming reality of her body pressed just inches from my back. We stood there, moving the knife in a slow, rhythmic cadence that felt less like cooking and more like a trance. "Better," she said, the word vibrating against my shoulder. She didn't step back immediately. She lingered in my personal space, a violation of the sister code that felt deliberate. When she finally withdrew, the absence of her warmth was a physical ache. I kept chopping, staring at the peppers as if they held the secrets of the universe, terrified that if I looked at her, I would confess everything. We ate at the small table, the silence between us no longer comfortable but thick, heavy with unasked questions. The wine had done its work, blurring the sharp edges of my anxiety just enough to make me reckless. "You never told me why you came," I said, breaking the quiet. "Murphy said you needed a break, but you don't look like someone who takes breaks." Luna looked at me over the rim of her glass. The candlelight caught the amber flecks in her eyes. "I don't take breaks," she admitted. "I take strategic retreats. Sometimes the noise in the city gets too loud. Sometimes you need to go somewhere quiet to hear what you actually want." "And what do you want?" The question was a precipice. I walked right up to the edge. She lowered the glass slowly. Her gaze was a physical touch, heavy and precise. She looked at my mouth, then up to my eyes. "I want things that are complicated," she said, the words vibrating with a quiet intensity. "I want things that require patience, things I probably shouldn't touch." The subtext was screaming. The dinner plates sat between us, the remains of the meal forgotten. This was the shift. The alcohol, the proximity, the isolation. It had stripped away the polite fiction. She wasn't just my sister's friend. I wasn't just the little sister. We were two people in a room that had become too small to hold the truth, circling a fire that was threatening to burn the whole house down. The realization hit me then, a cold clarity amidst the heat. She wasn't just tolerating my attention. She was basking in it, measuring the weight of it, and deciding exactly what she was going to do with it. We left the wreckage of dinner on the table. The wine bottle was empty, the plates stained with the remnants of a meal neither of us had really tasted. The cabin had become a pressure cooker, the air inside too hot, too heavy with the scent of herbs and the unspoken things piling up in the corners. I needed to breathe. I needed the cold. When I opened the sliding glass door, the night air hit us like a physical blow, sharp and cleansing, smelling of damp earth and deep water. "Walk," Luna said. It wasn't a suggestion. She grabbed a coat from the rack, Murphy's oversized wool jacket, which swallowed her frame, and stepped past me into the dark. We took the path that traced the perimeter of the lake. It wasn't a proper trail, just a deer track worn into the dirt and pine needles, uneven and treacherous in the moonlight. The ground was hard with the dropping temperature. Above us, the sky was a vast, indifferent vault of stars, the moon hanging low and heavy, casting a path of fractured silver across the black water. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the gravel and the rhythmic, sawing chorus of crickets in the tall grass. The narrowness of the path forced a proximity that the open air should have alleviated, but instead intensified. We walked shoulder to shoulder. The terrain didn't allow for distance. Every time the path dipped or turned, our arms brushed against each other. It was a friction of wool against wool, but I felt it on my skin. Each contact was a jolt, a reminder of the heat she was carrying inside that borrowed coat. I found myself timing my steps to hers, falling into a synchronized rhythm that felt dangerously domestic. "You never answered my question," I said, my voice sounding small in the vastness of the dark. "About what you want." Luna didn't break stride. She kept her hands buried deep in her pockets, her gaze fixed on the uneven ground ahead. "I told you, I want what I shouldn't touch." "That's a riddle," I countered, emboldened by the dark. "That's a deflection." "It's the truth." She stopped then, turning to look at the lake. We were at the furthest point from the cabin, a small clearing where the trees pulled back to reveal the full expanse of the water. The wind was stronger here, biting at my cheeks, whipping strands of hair across my vision. "You want to know why I'm alone? Why I come to places like this to escape? I want to know why someone like you, someone who commands a room just by standing in it, goes home to an empty apartment." She laughed, a short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. "Because people don't want me. They want the idea of me. They want the aesthetic, the competence, the way I look on their arm at a gala. But they don't want the reality. They don't want the person who gets bored easily, who demands precision, who sees through their posturing. She turned her head, looking at me properly now. The moonlight washed her face in pale silver, sharpening the angles of her cheekbones, turning her eyes into pools of shadow. I scare them, little sister. I look at them too closely, and they realize I'm not impressed. I'm not scared, I said. The words were out before I could weigh them. Luna stepped closer. The distance between us collapsed. The wind died down for a second, leaving a sudden, ringing silence. No, she whispered, you're not. And that is the problem. We stood on the edge of the dark water, the tension stretching between us until it felt like a physical thing, a wire pulled tight enough to snap. I could smell the cold lake air, the damp pine, and beneath it all, the warm, complex scent of her skin. The silence demanded to be filled. It demanded action. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that I was sure she could hear. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to close that final inch of distance and see if the reality matched the agonizing potential. She looked at my mouth. It was a fleeting glance, quick and devastating, before her eyes snapped back to mine. The hunger there was raw, unguarded for the first time. It wasn't the look of a friend. It was the look of someone standing on a ledge, calculating the fall. We should go back, she said, her tone stripped of its usual polish. Luna, I started, stepping into her space. We go back, she repeated, turning away from me, her movement abrupt, almost violent. Now. She started walking back toward the cabin without waiting for me, her pace faster, driven by something that looked like flight. I followed her, the cold air suddenly feeling like fire in my lungs, the silence of the walk back heavy with the knowledge that we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The breaking point hadn't been reached out here in the dark. It was waiting for us on the porch, inevitable and terrifying. The retreat from the lake wasn't a walk. It was a forced march against the inevitable. We moved through the dark in a silence that had teeth, the kind of quiet that precedes a structural failure. By the time the cabin's amber porch light cut through the trees, the sky finally broke. It didn't start with a drizzle. It started with a sudden, violent release, heavy drops hammering into the dry earth and turning the dust to mud in seconds. Luna reached the porch steps first. She didn't go up. She stopped, her hand gripping the rough-hewn railing, her knuckles white against the dark wood. The rain was falling harder now, a curtain of noise that isolated us from the rest of the world. I stopped 3 feet behind her. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath hitched, visible in the sudden drop in temperature. She was fighting a war inside that oversized wool coat, a battle between the precision she projected and the chaos she actually felt. Luna, I said. My voice was lost in the sound of the rain, but she heard it. She stiffened. She turned slowly. The porch light cast half her face in shadow, but the other half was illuminated, stark and terrified. Raindrops caught in her hair, glistening like diamonds against the dark waves. She looked at me, and for the first time since she arrived, the mask was completely gone. There was no sister's best friend armor, no sophisticated city detachment. There was just a woman, standing in the rain, looking at something she terrified herself by wanting. I stepped into the space she had tried to put between us. The rain soaked my shirt instantly, plastering the fabric to my skin, but I didn't feel the cold. I only felt the magnetic pull of her presence. I closed the distance until I was standing at the base of the steps, looking up at her. The elevation difference put our faces on the same level. Don't run, I whispered. It was a plea and a command. I'm not running, she breathed, but her eyes were darting over my face, reading the intent I was no longer trying to hide. I'm trying to save us. I don't want to be saved. I moved then. It wasn't a tentative test of waters like the sunscreen or the accidental brushes in the kitchen. It was deliberate. I stepped up onto the first riser, moving into her personal gravity. I saw her eyes widen, the pupils blown black, swallowing the iris. I leaned in, my intention clear, unflinching. I tilted my head, closing the final inch, ready to bridge the gap that had been tormenting us for 48 hours. I could feel the heat of her breath against my lips, smell the wine and the rain and the terrifying scent of her skin. I expected her to pull away. Or I expected her to meet me, to crash into the kiss with the same intensity I was bringing. She did neither. Just as my lips were about to graze hers, her hands came up. They didn't push me away. They framed my face. Her palms were cool, damp from the rain, a shocking contrast to the fever heat of my skin. She held me there, suspended in the agonizing space of almost. Her fingers threaded into the hair at my temples, her thumbs resting on my cheekbones, applying just enough pressure to hold me still. We froze. The downpour roared against the roof, but in that small space between our faces, the silence was absolute. I opened my eyes, which I hadn't realized I'd closed. She was staring at me with an expression of exquisite pain. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, lingered there with a hunger that made my knees weak, and then dragged back up to my eyes. She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. We were breathing the same air, sharing the same trembling tension. "I know you want me," she whispered. The words were a ragged sound, torn from her throat. Her thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, a caress that felt like it was leaving a permanent mark on my skin. "I can feel it. God, I can feel it coming off you in waves." I tried to speak, to argue, but her grip tightened slightly, grounding me. "But you can't have me," she finished, the sentence landing like a physical blow. It wasn't a rejection of desire. That was the torture of it. If she had said she didn't want me, I could have walked away with my pride bruised but intact. But this was a confession. She was admitting the pull was mutual, that the electricity in the kitchen and the heat on the dock weren't inventions of my hopeful imagination. She wanted this. She wanted it enough that her hands were shaking where they held my face. But the wall was there. Murphy. The years of history. The trust. The sisterhood that she refused to break, even if it meant denying the fire burning between us. "Luna," I choked out, my hands coming up to grip her wrists. "No," she said, pulling back just an inch, enough to break the spell, but not the contact. "Don't ask me to cross that line. I can't be the one who breaks her heart to fix mine." She looked at me one last time, a look that memorized the moment, and then she let go. The absence of her hands on my face was a sudden, violent cold. She turned, walked up the remaining steps, and crossed the porch. The screen door opened and closed with a soft click. I stood alone in the rain, the water soaking me to the bone, staring at the empty door. The rejection burned, but the memory of her thumb on my cheek burned hotter. She had said I couldn't have her, but the way she had looked at me said she was already mine. She just didn't know how to survive the cost of it. The morning arrived with the subtlety of a migraine, a stark gray light that exposed the dust motes dancing in the cabin air and the wreckage of our composure. I woke to the sound of tires crunching on gravel, a heavy, rhythmic grinding that signaled the return of the real world. Murphy was back. The dynamic shifted instantly, but the architecture of the cabin had fundamentally changed while she was gone. The walls felt closer, the air denser, charged with the static of everything that had almost happened on the porch steps. I walked out of the bedroom feeling like a ghost, haunting my own life. Murphy was already in the kitchen, a whirlwind of kinetic energy and noise. She was making coffee, clattering mugs against the counter, talking loudly on her phone about a briefing she'd missed. The contrast was jarring. Yesterday, this room had been a sanctuary of silence and slow-building heat. Today, it was just a kitchen again, filled with the debris of normal life. Luna was sitting at the small wooden table. She was dressed for the city. Dark denim, a silk blouse, her hair pulled back into a severe, perfect knot. But when I entered the room, she looked up, and the mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Her eyes met mine, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. It wasn't a look of regret. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. It was a look that said, "I remember the rain, and I remember your hands on my face." "Morning, sunshine," Murphy called out, ending her call and turning to face me. She looked bright, rested, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing in the middle of a crime scene. "Did you guys survive the isolation? I felt terrible leaving you alone." "We managed," Luna said. Her voice was steady, cool, pitched perfectly to betray nothing. She lifted her coffee mug, the same mug she'd held yesterday, her fingers tracing the same ceramic rim, and took a sip. "Your sister is capable." The word landed between us with a specific weight. Capable. It was a callback to the woodpile, to the dock, to the way I had stepped into her space on the porch. Murphy laughed, taking it as a generic compliment, but I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. We were speaking a dual language now. There was the conversation we were having with Murphy, and then there was the conversation happening in the silence, in the heavy, loaded glances exchanged over the rim of a coffee cup. Breakfast was an exercise in torture. I sat across from Luna, watching her navigate the conversation with Murphy. She maintained flawless social grace, but every time Murphy looked away, to check her phone, to butter a piece of toast, Luna's gaze would drift to me. She watched my hands, she watched my mouth. It was a validation of the night before. She wasn't pretending it hadn't happened. She was simply containing it, locking the desire behind a wall of necessity. The packing process was a chaotic reversal of our arrival. We were dismantling the temporary world we had built. I carried bags to the car, the physical exertion grounding me. Murphy was in the driver's seat, syncing her phone to the Bluetooth, already mentally halfway back to her office. I was struggling with the last suitcase, hefting it toward the trunk, when Luna appeared beside me. We were behind the car, shielded from Murphy's view by the popped trunk lid. The air was cold, smelling of wet earth and exhaust. Luna reached out, her hand covering mine on the handle of the suitcase. She didn't help me lift it. She just stopped me. The contact was brief, searing. I looked at her. She was standing close enough that I could smell that wood smoke perfume again, a scent that now triggered a physical ache in my chest. "I meant what I said," she murmured, her voice low, meant only for the small space between us. "About why I can't." "I know," I said. My voice sounded older to my own ears. "It doesn't make it true. It just makes it safe." Luna's eyes softened, a flash of that raw hunger returning. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain. She just looked at me with a profound, terrifying clarity. She was seeing me, not as Murphy's little sister, not as a child, but as the woman who had almost kissed her in the rain. "Safety is underrated," she whispered. Then she squeezed my hand, hard, a desperate, lingering pressure, and let go. She walked around to the passenger side, sliding into the car with that same fluid grace, leaving me standing alone by the trunk, the ghost of her touch burning on my skin, knowing that everything had changed, and absolutely nothing had changed at all. The drive back to the city was a masterclass in compartmentalization. Murphy was behind the wheel, filling the silence with a podcast about corporate fraud, her commentary punctuating the air like little bursts of static. I sat in the back, watching the landscape shift from the chaotic, organic greens of the forest to the rigid, gray geometry of the highway. But my attention was anchored to the passenger seat. I watched Luna in the rearview mirror. She had her sunglasses back on, that dark shield against the world, but I could see the line of her jaw, the tension she was holding in her neck. She wasn't looking at the road. She was looking at the side mirror. And every few minutes, her eyes would flick to the back seat. Our gazes would collide in that strip of reflective glass, a silent, secret collision that happened over and over again while Murphy complained about traffic. It was agonizing, but it was also clarifying. I touched my cheek, the skin still feeling the ghost of her thumb, the pressure of her restraint. I realized then that the rejection on the porch hadn't been a dismissal. It was a form of intimacy, deeper than anything physical we could have done. A kiss is easy. A kiss can be an accident, a product of wine and rain and proximity. But stopping, holding my face and confessing the want while denying the act, that required a terrifying amount of respect. She hadn't treated me like a child to be scolded. She had treated me like a danger to be managed. The little sister label was dead, left behind in the mud at the cabin. You don't look at your best friend's little sister with that kind of tortured hunger. You don't confess your desire to a child. We were playing a different game now, a long game. I looked at the back of her head and felt a strange, calm certainty settle over me. She thought she had closed the door, but all she had done was show me exactly where the lock was. We hit the city limits at dusk. The skyline rose up like a jagged set of teeth, swallowing the horizon. Murphy pulled up to the curb outside Luna's building, a sleek glass monolith that smelled of money and exclusion. The car idled, the engine humming a low note beneath the city noise. Luna got out. The movement was sharp, decisive. She leaned into the driver's side window to say goodbye to Murphy, slipping effortlessly back into the role of the best friend. She promised brunch next week. She laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. Then she straightened up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She should have walked away. That was the script. But she didn't. She stood on the concrete, the wind whipping her coat around her legs, and looked at the back window. The tint was dark, but she knew I was there. She held my gaze through the glass, stripping away the performance she had just given Murphy. Her expression was raw, unguarded, a silent echo of the whisper on the porch. I know you want me. As we pulled away, merging back into the stream of traffic, my phone buzzed against my thigh. I looked down, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was a text from a number I hadn't realized I was waiting for. No name. I watched the 3 dots of the typing indicator appear, disappear, then appear again. Finally, a single line arrived that changed the entire architecture of the silence between us. The rain hasn't stopped. I stared at the screen, the white letters glowing in the dim car, and smiled. She was right. The boundary was there, solid and high. But she was the one standing at the gate, checking to see if I was still watching. The door to my apartment clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the city. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was charged with the static of a conversation that had only just begun. That's the exquisite pain of a boundary drawn not by indifference, but by an excess of loyalty. If you've ever wanted someone who was standing on the other side of a line you couldn't cross, tell me in the comments. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the deep breath before the plunge. Subscribe to see where we land.